Her hips moved according to the beats in a club that was filled with different colors. Her best friend Heaven and his brother Jungkook, the notorious Mafia leader whom she always considered her brother, were also there with her, drinking one glass after another. After a few minutes, all of them were completely wasted. They sat on the chairs across the counter. Heaven, look at that girl. He pointed at the girl who just entered the club. She was looking, but Ryan looked at him with annoyance. Heaven, don't even think about it. Last time, we had to take you home with your punched face and a swollen lip, but Heaven was too drunk to listen. Heaven came a little close to Vine and said, "You just wait and watch how I impress her. Last time was just bad luck. Otherwise, no one can resist my charm." He flicked her nose as he said, and without letting her say a word, he approached the other girl who just entered the club. Fine. If something like this happens again, I don't know him. Jungkook laughed while she folded her arms as she denied to look at his annoying, seducing moves. She rolled her eyes and said to Jungkook, "Pass me that drink, brother." He was going to pass her that, but his hand stopped in the air when he heard the last word. Jungkook's expression hardened, his jaw clenching visibly as he took a look at her. "What did you just call me?" Jungkook's voice was low and dangerous, his eyes narrowing as he kept looking at her. Vine looked at him with surprise as to what else she could call him. She had always called him brother, but he controlled it every time in front of Heaven. But now that he was drunk, does he care about anyone else than himself? He didn't like it at all, being called a brother by her. She was looking at him, trying to find an answer as to why he was acting like that, when he suddenly got up and held her wrist. "What are you doing?" she asked him loudly, but he just looked at her and quietly said that, "Come with me." Without saying anything further, he dragged her towards the gents' washroom, somewhere they could be alone, but especially because he wanted to talk to her in silence, instead of screaming because of the loud music. As soon as they entered, he locked the room from inside and pinned her against the locked door. "What the hell are you doing?" she asked in sheer shock, but Jungkook wasn't listening. Alone in the small, dimly lit space, Vine could feel Jungkook's anger radiating off him in waves. She shrank back against the door, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to think of what to say. "Brother, I didn't mean anything by it," Vine began, her voice trembling with fear. "I was just—" But Jungkook cut her off as he hit his hand beside her head on the door, so loud that it sent shivers in her whole body, his eyes flashing with rage as he looked at her. "Don't," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "Don't ever call me that again. Do you understand?" Vine looked at him for a few seconds, trying to process everything. His eyes were burning, but she couldn't understand why. He was drunk, so she thought it must be the reason he was acting like that. "Jungkook, you are drunk. You don't know what you're saying, or—" Another hit on the wall stopped her from saying anything further. Jungkook, his eyes never moving away from hers, containing the same rage. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Her throat tightened with fear. She had never seen Jungkook like this before, so angry and unpredictable. It frightened her, but at the same time, it stirred something inside her. A strange, twisted kind of excitement that she didn't know what to name. Vine nodded. Okay, I won't call you that. Let's go now. She tried to get rid of his grip and turn around, but he held both of her shoulders from his hands and kept her face at him. For what felt like an eternity, they stood in tense silence, looking at each other. At that moment, she felt something stir inside her, looking at his drunk eyes and his feelings for her, clearly evident in his eyes. She couldn't believe it was all true. She couldn't believe he meant it when he said, I know exactly what I'm doing. She was lost in his eyes because at that moment, all she could see in them was her. Then, slowly, Jungkook's expression softened, his anger giving way to something else, something Vine couldn't quite name again. I'm sorry, he said at last, his voice hoarse with emotion, as he left her shoulders and tried to move away from her. I didn't mean to. I just. But before he could finish, Vine stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, bringing him closer to her. In that moment, all the fear and uncertainty melted away, leaving only the two of them bound together. Vine had always had crush on Jungkook, but it was all because of how handsome he was. It was nothing else than that, or so she thought. She tried to only stay away from that kind of relationship with him because she knew how dangerous he could be when he was angry. Even though she wanted him because of his looks, she tried to be mature and think about her own good. But now that she was standing with him in her grip, and as she looked in those drunk eyes, she couldn't help but be drawn to him. Despite the fear that she always had when she was with him, she felt something for the first time. Something she didn't want to let go. Fear be damned. Maturity, let it go to hell. At that moment, she wanted to drown in those drunk eyes. She looked at his lips, giving him the signal because she didn't want to go first. Whether it was fear or because of the feeling that she was a girl, so she didn't want to go first. Whatever it was, she just didn't want to do it first. Even when she was sure she wouldn't be rejected. She saw it in his eyes. Jungkook, I'm sorry if I took your sign wrong. He didn't even complete saying it when suddenly he crashed his lips upon hers as hardly as he could. Before wasting a second, she kissed him back, and she knew immediately that he was a professional kisser, going as hard as he could and as rough as his emotions were. He told her with the gesture that how much he waited for it. All the patience and anger, because he couldn't have her, was evident in that one kiss. He showed her that he was as passionate as he could be for her. He showed her how much he wanted her through the kiss. The more he deepened it, the more she knew it. The more he went wild, the more she wanted to do the same. The feeling of never wanting to let him go grew deeper and deeper with the kiss. Then they let go of each other to take some breaths, even when they didn't want to. They finally had a close look to each other. Not what they always used to have. This time was different. This time they had tasted each other. The look with which they always had while looking at each other changed in a matter of minutes. Wine. You will be the same when you're sober. You're not drunk, right? He smiled while breathing heavily. Don't worry, I'm as sober as I could be at this moment. She smirked and looked at his lips again. By the way, you feel like a professional kisser. He laughed, and even though he was barely holding himself back because of the breathing, he said loudly, I can't believe this is happening. He came close to her, caging her in his embrace again. Do you know how much I waited for this? His eyes filled with burning passion. Don't even think about going anywhere else for the whole night. Wine. What about heaven? He must have been lying somewhere after getting beaten up. He laughed. Wine's eyes widened. Let's go to him. He must have caused some trouble. She turned back to go away, but he tightened his grip against her waist. You're not going anywhere for the night. Wine. He's your brother, she said loudly. Before she could argue any more, someone kicked on the door from outside. Looks like I win. He sighed, looking at her, and loosened his grip a little, with which she turned around and opened the door. The man outside was surprised to see in the men's room. But do they care? He went behind her, and they found Heaven on the road, lying down, as if someone kicked him out. They both looked at each other and laughed. Fine, let's take him home and spend the night there. He smiled finally. His mood, which was ruined because of Heaven, was lifted up, and he came close to her. That's the best idea someone could offer. She laughed.